Well, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Folari. The election is tomorrow, and I'm sure everything is as prepared as it's ever gonna be, considering the importance of the event. In that connection, this morning our guest is, it's not the first time we're having her on the program, but we're delighted to have Cynthia Mbamalu. She is Director of Programs at IAGA Africa. She's joining us remotely. Good morning to you, Cynthia.
Good morning.
And thank you very much for making time for us. Now, just in case anybody is wondering, IAGA Africa, IAGA. That's it. 3 syllables. IAGA
Yes,
Africa.
yes, IAGA Africa.
Yes, on the website, you'll find that they're a non-profit civic hub of change makers committed to the promotion of democratic governance, human rights, and civic engagement. I got that right. I just for anybody who is wondering what's that all about. So in that connection, I can imagine that you've been very, very busy. Of course, there is IAGA all over the country. In every state of the country?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, in every local government.
Okay, so yes, in every local government. So now going into the election tomorrow, and since you are very much research based, you also, I imagine there'll be an observer aspect to your work as well. Give me your impressions on how good the preparations are, or what you think of the preparations so far for the event tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you. I know tomorrow's election is going to be an interesting one to look forward to. We know it will be competitive in most states, if not contentious. And so there's a lot around ensuring that there's preparation for the election is properly done and everything is in place. From our, so IAGA Africa released our pre-election statement yesterday, actually. And from our data, as at Wednesday, we had received reports from 26 states that INEC had moved their started deployment of materials from the central bank, that's in the state capital, to the local government areas. And by yesterday, we started receiving reports from our states that materials were arriving in some local government areas. We're still tracking that today, because the idea for elections preparations as it relates to logistics and management is that, one, early deployment of materials to the local government level, and then further deployment to the resident registration area centers, the RAC centers, enables early deployment of materials and personnel to polling units on elections day. And so if we can have materials and personnel successfully deployed today, being the eve of the elections Friday, at least by this evening, that we have personnel and materials deployed to the RACs, they call them the registration area centers. These locations are what you call wards. They are closer to the polling unit. If we can have materials and personnel there tonight, it also enables on the elections morning that they move easily from their polling unit, from their wards, from the racks to the polling units for deployment. So that's one part. And I think it's good to see that INEC is doing what it can to move materials and personnel early. Like I said, we're still observing that, and we're hoping that we get more reports later in the day. The other part around preparation, especially as it relates to deployment of materials and personnel, is from the learning from the presidential elections. If you remember that the elections of 25th February 2023 had recorded late commencement of polls. In fact, IAGA Africa's watching the vote data indicated that from our sampled polling units, we have observers across the local government areas. As at 9:30 a.m., only 44% of polling units nationwide had commenced voting and accreditation on that presidential election, which was like 1 hour post commencement time. And so we saw polling going into late into the evening, and some places counting was not late into the night or early hours of Sunday morning. And we want to ensure that, or rather, we need INEC to ensure that for these elections, early deployment is achieved. One of the things we learned from the last elections were some transporters refused to move on elections morning because they were not adequately paid. It's important that INEC, the resident electoral commissioners at the state level, the electoral officers at the local government levels, who are responsible for engaging these transporters, that they engage with them and ensure that the materials and the personnel are properly allocated to their vehicles, and these transporters are paid their money before they move, just so that we don't have situations where transporters refuse to move when the materials and personnel are around. The other thing is also to ensure that there is sufficient materials deployed to different polling units. And so for me, that's one important preparation that we need to see INEC tighten its planning around, but also providing contingency plans. So
Yes.
what happens if some vehicles refuse to move? What happens if the materials are not sufficient? We need to ensure that INEC needs to ensure that there is better contingency plan for this election, just so that we don't have late commencement of polls.
Indeed, because that was a challenge in the last election. And another challenge is that, of course, because they didn't start early, then they were going to, they wouldn't be done early either. And in some cases, everybody knows the power situation. In some cases, it was something like something of a sight for sore eyes, where you found people in darkness. This was about 7, 8 o'clock or so. And they were using phone torches and that kind of a thing. And of course, one would be wondering, what does it take, as you've just spoken about contingency plans, what would it take to, have a generator there or whatever? Maybe, unless it is that we don't know as much about it as, maybe people like you or even INEC itself. How come that happened, and will it be averted? First of all, of course, if we start on time, we likely might end on time. But if the unexpected happens and it goes beyond that, I hope we won't have those scenes again.
Would conclude within daylight.
Yes.
It also means counting of ballots at the polling to conclude within daylight. So ordinarily, elections should commence by 8:30 a.m. at the polling unit, meaning that personnel are to arrive at least by 7:30 a.m. We need to have INEC officials and materials there, so that they will do all they need to do and get ready to begin at 8:30. Voting ordinarily ought to end by 2:30 or when the last person on the queue votes. So that's one point, because if you do that early, you finish with daylight. Now, the focus would then be on collation. And for collation, if we conclude on time, collation at the ward level can also be concluded even before 7 p.m., all things being equal. However, the issue around contingency is key. Now, while I know that INEC may not be able to provide generators for all polling units, because we have 176,606 polling units where elections will be held. That's a huge number. However, we know that as civil society organization, we've engaged INEC before, and as observer groups, I know that INEC provides generators for the local government offices that are sent to the ward, the racks. Now, part of the logistics planning for the elections is that most of the racks where the personnel will be camping the eve of the elections are, the situation in Nigeria, poor infrastructure, so they don't have water, they don't have power, and they have resources provided for generators for those racks, water tanks, and what have you. Now, why is my emphasis around having voters, having the process conclude early, so that the focus will be at results collation. At the point of results collation, there are generators provided. It is the responsibility of the electoral officers at that level to ensure that the funds for those generators were adequately used to get those generators, and that they are properly fueled to ensure that there is proper power at that level. But like you mentioned, if it commence early, then the focus should be at results collation, because it means voting can conclude 5, 6 p.m. and the next phase would be the results collation. At that point, INEC needs to ensure that is proper generator provided. Nigerians, yes, I know Nigerians, out of the love for our patriotism, people were providing help. Some places people brought their generators, but we also should not, because people are passionate, we also should not punish Nigerians for their passion, because we have situations where people waited up to 20 hours just to cast their vote. That is not acceptable in our democracy. And I think at this point, INEC ought to do the right thing. But I do believe that if there's proper accountability, the resources provided for these standby generators and what have you would be properly available to provide power at those levels. I think one other thing we had observed was around the technology. The beavers will play an important role in this election also. And why? Well, the Electoral Act is clear. Beavers voting. And one of the things we learned from the last election that INEC did deploy beavers across the polling units, but there were some locations where, out of what we call community conspiracy, they decided not to use the beavers to accredit voters. It's important voters understand that if the beavers is not used to accredit you on elections day, those results for the polling need to be cancelled. If it's not cancelled at the polling unit level, it will be cancelled at the collation level because the beavers records the data of accredited voters and it is transmitted to the back-end server after the polls are concluded. So there's one. The other point around that is the training of the personnel. Our observations showed that some locations, the personnel did not know how to manage the beavers. So it was not like the beavers was faulty. It was more like the people were not properly trained. And there are two ways to resolve this. One, INEC needs to ensure at least refresher training. It could be through messages sent to all to their personnel, reminding them on the steps on how to use the beavers. The other thing is to ensure that only trained personnel are deployed. Some reports we got in the last election indicated that there were locations where personnel, ad hoc officials were changed before the deployment. So it's important that these issues are addressed. Personnel that are properly trained and know how to handle the beavers are those that are deployed, and that the beavers is used optimally. And the second part to that is the results collation part. And I think this was one issue that was very critical in the last elections. And INEC, I want to believe, has learned from that experience that the INEC's result viewing portal will play an important role in this election. So it's also important that the results from the polling units, the screenshots are taken, or the pictures of these results are taken and uploaded on the INEC result portal as is expected, just so that citizens can also access their results from wherever they are. That way, it inspires confidence. Well, you know the thing about election, sometimes it may not be true, but perception is everything.
Indeed.
When people perceive that there is an issue, they just make judgment. And if you create doubt, it affects trust in the system. And we need to ensure that for these elections, INEC must ensure that it promotes transparency in all that it does, just so that citizens are inspired and have confidence in the process and in the outcome.
And this is a much bigger election than the first time around in terms of operationally. Yes. And what you've just spoken about, uploading of the results, that also was a sticking point. INEC, I don't know. I think they're still investigating. Maybe you have more information on it. INEC, I think the talk was that as soon as they saw that something was not quite the way it had to be, then they decided, you know what, we're not going to take any chances. These results, you can have them either in the digital form or in the hard copy form like this, so we're going to do this for whatever. Could you talk about that whole area and INEC's need to, well, I don't know, if it is frustrate some sharp practices?
Yes, which is why I talked about some places where people didn't just want to use the beavers, not that the beavers was faulty. So there's that part around individuals who want to manipulate the process and decide on their own not to follow the procedure and guidelines. There is that part of the conversation. And for that, one of the things, the main call we had given to INEC was a major demand that INEC conducts an internal audit, both internal audit and external audit, and internal investigation to identify personnel that are found wanting in manipulating the process and sanction them. Not just sanction them, the law provides for prosecution so that they are prosecuted. That way you deter those kind of practices. There's that part. There's also the issues around the portal having challenged on elections day. Now, I would only rely on the information released by INEC in a statement. And it had highlighted that the reason the IREF portal wasn't functional was because one, they said it experienced some technical glitches, and the upscaling of the platform for the national elections was the major challenge because it was deployed for smaller elections before the 25th of February. Considering that post the elections, we've had about almost 2 weeks to the governorship elections, I want to believe that INEC internally, working with his team and his tech team, have properly addressed every issues around technology for the INEC result viewing portal. That's one. There were also reports around attempted cyber attacks on the platform.
Yes.
These are common. If you have a simple website, there will always be an attempt to, there will also always be cyber attacks on the platform. However, INEC had I assured Nigerians and every one of us that internally they have special security, cyber security measures in place to secure the portal. And so the issues around the portal not functioning for the presidential elections on election day were not necessarily an issue of cyber attack, but rather about basically the technology itself.
Yes.
And technology works when people get it to work, which is why for these elections, based on the conversations and just listening to the statement from the Electoral Commission, I want to believe that they have addressed those challenges observed in the last elections, and for these elections, they would be properly addressed. The third part is for personnel who on their own decide not to upload the results, because there was a point where you had individuals who could not take pictures of the result. Ordinarily, what they were supposed to do was take a picture of the result. Now, the idea of uploading the scanned copy or a picture, the image of the result, is to limit the tendencies or the chances of these figures manipulated. So, if you notice, what is uploaded is not the raw figures. You don't have them imputing numbers. It's a picture that is uploaded on the portal, and the idea is once a picture is taken to upload, you can't change that, right? Which is one of the measures introduced to limit manipulation of the results on a portal. And for these elections, one of the things we observed in the last elections, because we did observe that in about 88% of the polling units, the presiding officers took a picture of the result from a sheet from EC8A at the polling unit level. But we had a number of people who did not do that because your training requires that at the polling unit you take a picture and you upload. So even if something is wrong with the portal, once the portal is up, because you've began the process of upload, it will drop on the portal. That is the idea. Just like when you take a picture on your phone, you want to post on, let's say, social media. Sometimes you post it, it doesn't drop immediately, you do. But because you've initiated that process, it takes a while. After a while, it posts. You see, post successful. It's almost that logic for this. And so it's about the personnel also understanding that you've been trained to do this. Get the right things done. And for voters, honestly, for these elections, citizens' vigilance is key. Voter vigilance is key. For voters, we need to conduct ourselves in a peaceful manner and ensure the personnel do the right thing. So when they finish the process, tell them, please take a picture of this result and initiate the process of upload. And that way, they also understand that voters are aware of the
Exactly.
procedure. However, like I said, we do that in a peaceful manner because we also don't want to create chaos on elections day, and we also don't want to put the lives of our officials at risk. But we need to ensure that they do the right thing at the polling unit. We expect that they take a picture of the result sheet and upload. In addition to that, INEC also provides that there is a result sheet that will be posted at the polling unit. The result sheet from EC60E. Now, they call this the people's result sheet. After the results and data are computed on the INEC results sheet from EC8A, it's also written in a bigger sheet. This is like a poster that is kept at the polling unit. Voters can also take a picture of that and keep as their evidence. That is not the one that is uploaded. That one is posted at your polling unit. The one uploaded is the from EC8A. And what is required is that they take a picture of that and they upload on the portal. If these things are done, I want to believe that it will increase transparency. But first, we need to understand that it begins with the people. We need that behavioral change because you can introduce technology, you can introduce the rules and change the processes. But if the people do not understand the importance of credible elections, it will become all this new innovation would not affect the kind of change we want. So it also requires that voters, political parties and their supporters, party agents, INEC officials, and security agents understand the importance of transparent elections and that their respective polling units ensure that the right thing is done. Because at the end, it's not necessarily about the one person, the chairman at the head. It's also about what everyone does at every level. Indeed. So from INEC at the national to the state, to the local government, to the polling units officials, and then to us, the people who engage the process.
Okay. Thank you. In fact, Tony has called in. Tony is in Warri, Delta State. I think, Tony, you have an observation or a question? Or
I have an observation, and
okay.
At the observation, the last presidential election on the 26th of February. Hello?
Go ahead, please.
So the majority of this forum, officials that came said that the when they came, they said the person that was supposed to operate the vehicle went to, is no longer around. Little time they told us that her number is no longer connecting. Then the assistant said that he can operate it. Then the little time again, they said that she could not operate it. Forgotten the code, the device code. Then later on, we forced them to they said that we're not going to use the device. It should be manually. We are going to vote manually. We told them no. We forced them. Later on, they made a call and said, okay, the code. Someone has sent them the code. And they opened the device. It was almost one after one. So when the election commenced, when we started voting, we wanted to open the device. We are 600 plus that they only have electoral paper, voting paper, the electoral paper that they only have 120. Okay, let's continue voting. Before the end, they told us that the paper has, they want them to go and bring paper. We forced them. They went and brought the paper and we continued the voting. At the end, they said the device could not upload the results to the and
Tony, in Warri, I don't know. I think Cynthia has got the gist of your observation because the audio is your sound is drifting in and out. But I'm sure it's a throwback to what she was saying with better training this time. This whole point that you made, Tony, about not knowing the code and all of that. Would you like to comment on Tony's observation?
Yes, we did get some of those reports where some of the personnel had said, oh, they didn't have the code, so they couldn't upload. Some of them had said you could tell they didn't know how to use the beavers. And if you were trained, there's no how you wouldn't know how to use the beaver, which is why I talked about training. The reports we had gotten was that there were instances where people were changed before the elections, which is why the emphasis is on for every personnel deployed, they must be the trained individuals that will be deployed. Now, there is one of the officials manages or handles the beavers. They are all trained on how to use it, but there's one who handles it. And at the end, they also use it to take a picture of the result sheet. But there are two things to make around this. When it comes to accreditation, the beavers does not need internet connectivity because every beavers is configured to the polling unit with the register of voters for that polling unit. So that's one part. Once it's turned on, and the beavers operate with the SIM that once it goes to a location, any network that is there is what works on it, because the part they need in connectivity is the upload part. And so conversion around code or no code is a function of training and an oversight on the INEC on INEC supervisors. So on elections day, there's a team called the RATEC, the Registration Area Technical Team of INEC. Now, these RATECs they are located, or rather they are stationed at the wards, because wards are closer to polling unit, and they provide support to the polling officials at the polling unit. What we need to see for this election is to ensure that every ward has the required numbers of RATEC present, so that once there is a tech issue, that is immediately escalated and they are present to resolve those issues. So if, for instance, officials do not even know how to operate the beavers, a report should be made to the RATEC. And I think at this point, INEC should actually, at local level, provide the details of this RATEC so that voters themselves can also call the RATEC and say, at my polling unit, the beavers is not working, or the official is refusing to use the beavers.
Indeed.
That's one level of oversight, the RATEC.
Okay.
The other is INEC have supervisors and monitors moving around on elections day. These individuals have the power to ensure that things are going well, to checkmate the excesses of personnel deployed at the polling unit. And we need to see them function better. One, their numbers and details should be made public at the local level, so that voters would know who to call and who to make reports to.
Okay, Cynthia, one moment, please. Forgive me for interrupting you.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon for interrupting you, but Joshua has called in from Irewole, and I think he also might have an observation or a question. Good morning, Mr. Joshua in Irewole.
Yes.
Uncle Yori, good morning to you.
Good morning, sir.
Thank to your guest. She mentioned something very important, Uncle Yori. Early commencement of polling. Uncle Yori is very important. And the last point she made now, having the phone numbers of whoever is allocated to a unit, we should be able to call INEC. They send messages to phone numbers. I still got one this morning. So they have details of all the registered voters in Nigeria. I am surprised about they have details. So if they can send such details
Text
or messages,
yes,
then they should include the number of the individuals that are involved so that when there is any problem, we know who to call. And then finally, the observers. I want to appeal to Yaga Africa. They have an important role to play in our elections. Very important. I want to appeal to them to put national interest above personal interest. The situation where, general statements are issued that a whole national election is flawed and not credible, when we had pockets of protest in certain places, it is not healthy.
okay.
The reports to state exactly what happened and in the places where it happened, because their words are very important.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joshua. Let's get Cynthia's reaction to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joshua, for that comment. And I'll start from the last point. For Yaga Africa, at least if you can read our reports. One thing where we always say our responsibilities to Nigerian people. So our tagline is for all Nigerians, beholden to none, driven by data. And so if you heard me making my comment around the beavers, for instance, I said we know that the beavers was deployed across the country, but there were locations where people decided not to use it. So if I'm specific, our data did show that the beavers was deployed in 99% of our sample polling units, and our sample is representative. However, that's 1%, which is why I said in some polling units, it was not that the beavers did not work. It was just individuals who decided not to use it. And so there is that part. And I clearly stated that we did get reports that the beavers was used to take images of the result sheet, at least in 88 or 89% of polling units. That is a significant number. However, if you think about the 11, 15% where 88% means that there's a smaller number where this was not done.
Mm-hmm.
And that was why I talked about some of them was about issues of training, because if people had taken pictures as is required across board and initiated upload, even if the portal is down, when it comes up, it starts to go up. And I gave an instance around when you post things on social media. Sometimes you want to post, it doesn't go up immediately, but once you've clicked send, after a while, it shows you post successful. It's also the same logic. So for us, our observation is driven by data, and we deploy a special methodology that relies on statistics and technology to provide accurate information on the process of the elections. The major parts where we also highlighted the issues were logistics. And on logistics, I'm going to consistently say that INEC did fail when it came to logistics. Because if you also observe, 44% of polling at 9:30 had only commenced the process, just 44%. In fact, in locations, our data showed that in South-South, only 32% had commenced polling by 9:30. In Southeast, only 11% of polling have commenced voting and accreditation by 9:30 a.m. And so we had polling units where elections did not also hold. And for us, our assessment is an overall assessment of the process, but looking at key indicators to ensure that the process was transparent. And if we constantly provide the data, you can follow our report is always objective. Where the commission fails, we would call out the commission, because our responsibility is to the Nigerian people and our democracy. Where things did work well, we provide the data to show that at this level, it worked well. However, to this extent, it did not work well. And I'm hoping that Nigerians also understand the importance of balanced conversation around these elections. We need to reduce fake news. We need to reduce spread of disinformation, especially as it relates to results. We noticed that some people were posting fake results. Please, for this election, every Nigerian is a responsible citizen. I want to believe. This is me believing that we are all responsible. But we also have that burden of leadership as Nigerians to share only accurate verified information around the process, just so that we don't create chaos or confusion, because false information spreads fast before the truth is even going out. Most people that saw the fault may not see the truth. And it's important we all take this as a responsibility to share accurate and verified information around these elections. And the other part is promoting peace. I think one of the things we've seen post the presidential election is this divisive conversation around ethnic and religious lines. Nigeria is bigger than any one of us. And for a diverse people, the beauty of our country is our diversity. I wouldn't want to live in a country where we are all one ethnic group or all one religion. I think it would be boring. I love to travel to every part of the country and experience their culture, experience their food, experience their lifestyle. And I think that is what makes us beautiful. We shouldn't let elections divide us. This election is about Nigerian people. It's about every one of us, because at the end, if the system fails, we all suffer for it. And so let our common suffering unite us as a common identity, not just our ethnic and religious lines. Because I wanted to make this point because it's been worrying going on social media, seeing fake news going out, seeing people fighting around religious ethnic lines. We are better than that. And Nigeria deserves a united people. I think for this election, it's important we focus on the issues and not on ethnic and religious identities.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I mean, and especially for the last point that you've just made about people publishing information. I use the word publishing very loosely because everybody who has a phone now is suddenly a publisher.
Yeah.
And everybody who has a phone is a publisher. And they really are heating up the system out of misguided enthusiasm. Sometimes they outright are, there to create problems. But you've explained it, especially the technical glitches that could happen. You explained, how with banks, for instance, you see how it's a technology that is being used, and if something doesn't, sometimes things are reversed and things are made right, not immediately, but as you just explained with social media, that you might have posted a thing that might not have gone, but when the server does come back up or whatever, it will drop, so to speak. But this is a big one. 176,000 polling units, you had said. And the BVAS machine is supposed to be attached to all of these places, right?
Yes.
Now,
every polling unit is to have a BVAS.
Exactly. And there are over 176,000 of them. And
yes.
And then INEC probably will want to also have backups as well. So really, INEC has their job cut out for them. But then they didn't start planning yesterday. But it is
True.
a humongous job. And
it is.
INEC is up to the task, hopefully. Is that your thought, your impression as well?
Yeah.
Okay, because everything that INEC wanted, government or the authorities provided for them. And so I imagine that, yep, INEC will be up to the task. Everybody's looking forward to it. And the BVAS...
Different elections. Yes. It was tested in 2021. It first in the Isoko South constituency elections in Anambra, and then subsequent elections in Ekiti and Osun, and others by Abuja area council elections. INEC did, the funding for the elections was released also in 2020, 1 year to the elections, in line with the new Electoral Act. And so for these elections, I want to believe that everything is in place. The plan is actually, some polling units will have more than one BVAS, because you remember that some polling units have high number of registered voters. I don't want to get into that because the Electoral Commission still has a lot of work to do to reduce the number of, or decongest some polling units, because some polling units have as high as 3,000 registered voters or even more. So we expect that polling units with large number of voters, I think INEC had said with more than 750 voters, so polling units would have more than one BVAS to help manage the crowd. And so we expect that some polling units have more than one, but at least every polling unit must have one BVAS configured to it. INEC had spent the last days configuring BVAS to the polling units, and I think by this week, the report said that that Tuesday, INEC had concluded the reconfiguration of the BVAS to polling units for these governorship and state assembly elections. That's one part. The other part is they are based on INEC's plan. I'm just speaking based on the plan that was communicated to the public, and they are standby or substitute beavers, or what would I call them, backup beavers at the ward level. Now, these beavers are provided at the ward level just in case a beaver malfunctions and needs replacement. And our data did show that in the last elections on 25th of February, in 2% of the polling units, the beavers malfunctioned and were replaced. So it did show that it was a small number, but there were some polling units where the beavers had to be replaced midway into the process. And so it showed that they were back up in those locations. Now we're hoping that this is also done for these elections, especially because we had received the reports from Rivers post the elections that about 22 beavers were unaccounted for or either missing. That was as at today is Friday, as at Wednesday. I want to believe that between Wednesday, Friday, that all states have the required numbers of beavers that they have, and that they have backup beavers also present at the ward level, just in case anything malfunctions, that they are replaced. So that's the other part of the conversation. However, INEC had the time to plan. The resources were provided, unless INEC tells us otherwise, to manage even the cash crunch. INEC had said that the CBN was providing them with cash for the time for the issues that may require cash transactions.
That's right.
So just working with the information from the Electoral Commission, I do believe that INEC ought to be prepared for these elections. And you know why a lot of people were frustrated with the IREV and why that created the major challenge it did was because before the elections, the Commission had promised that everything was ready for the election.
Exactly.
And if you work with technology, you know that if you put technology to work, technology works. For these elections, honestly, INEC needs to reduce excuses and ensure that by today, the portal is up and ready to take up 176,606 polling units results across board for the governorship and state assembly elections. If this is done, it would inspire confidence. These are elections to rebuild trust in the process. And I want to believe that the Electoral Commission is aware of this and is working based on the learnings from the last elections to give Nigerians a process that a lot of people would be happy about the conduct. But to Nigerians also, we also need to ensure that we come out to vote. These elections are even more important than the national elections. And you may ask me why. If development doesn't happen at the state level, we cannot see development at the national level, because at the end, they say tiny drops of rain make a mighty ocean. The work we do at the state level, rather the work the state governors and legislators do at the state level, would go a long way to ensure that our states are economically viable and catering to the needs of the people. Before that, if that is not done, we'll constantly have a national crisis on our developmental sectors and every other sectors. Okay, and so for Nigerians, honestly, for those listening, these elections are, if not more important, very important for every one of us. Please turn out in your numbers and vote. The last elections, turnout was so poor. That is an F9. If you write an exam and you come with 27%, that is an F9. Indeed. You will feel like all the school fees you paid wasted. So please, we need to do better for these elections.